Hello friends, it's so lovely to be with you again. We've had quite a hot few days recently, and just today we've had a nice sort of break in the weather, some relief from the heat, and we're actually just having a little bit of rain, so that's been really nice. Last summer when I arrived in the UK was really hot and really dry, almost borderline on drought, and I thought, oh no, I left that in South Africa. So having a bit of rain this year has really made it worthwhile. Anyway, I thought I'd share something slightly different with you today. I thought I'd share with you some of the things I do on rocks. I have this little thing where I collect rocks of all different sizes. I'm fortunate that at work I have quite a large selection of these stones that are in the ground, so as we're digging and preparing new beds and things, these are what are in there. There's a castle near to me, and a lot of the castle was built with these kind of stones. So I collect them and then I wash them in just some warm soapy water which has fairy liquid in, and then I come to paint them. So my painting, I use either just one of these little testo pots. This is just something I got from Wilko. They're not terribly expensive, they're about £1 or £1.20. Or you could use opaque white, which is nice solid white if you want it as a basis for painting on other things. Or you could even use gouache if you want to. So I got some of these tubes fairly reasonably on a sale, and gouache is just opaque watercolor, but it is actually quite nice for painting on the stones. Or if you were going to do something where you knew that the base color was largely a dominant color like a red, and you were painting a ladybird, you could paint your stone red. So always just do a little test first to make sure that the paint is actually covering your surface nicely. These paints, the PEBBLES ones, are slightly more transparent in their base than some of the others I've done, but if you were to use a metallic they wouldn't be. So I tend to go with these little tester pots for just a background color. They're fairly cheap and cheerful, and they have a lovely range of colors. And what you're wanting to do is just to pick up a little bit on your brush and to paint pretty much half the stone to begin with. So some of these stones have more little sort of indentations than others, so you can use this kind of stippling action if you're wanting to get into the little holes, just to be able to spread the paint all around. And you paint half of it and then you leave it to dry, and then you come and flip it over. You might need to do a second coat depending on how good you get at doing this. I have, because I've just done so many of these, been able to paint quite large areas before I place these down, and I know what kind of coverage I'm looking for, but mostly I would say you're probably looking at 2 coats of paint. So that would be my first coat, and I'm going to leave it to dry. Once you've got your first coat on and it has started to dry, you generally have a slightly sort of textured look like that, where you maybe see a little bit of the stone showing through. You've maybe missed some spots. So now's your opportunity just to go over this with a second coat, and you can already see by just putting that on that it's actually giving it much better coverage. So I would then take my stones that I've got the first layer on and just give them a second coat. I find 2 coats, this gives me a really nice base on which to work with. We had a church camp this last weekend, and it was lovely because I took these stones that I'd painted with me for some of the kids to actually play around on, and I have some paint markers which I'll show you just now, and that was great fun. So I'm going to paint a whole lot of these, give them 2 coats, and then I'll come back and show you what I'm going to do next. Hello dear friends, I hope you've had a good week so far. We are definitely heading into winter here. It's pitch black when I get up to go to work in the morning, and our clocks change over tonight. We go 1 hour back in time, so I know by the time I come out of work next week at 5 o'clock that it's going to be very dark, because it gets dark at about 4. Having said that, I don't mind winter at all, so I'm actually quite looking forward to it. When I walk down to work, down to the farm, it's actually really beautiful just watching the sun rise up over the fields and through the hedgerows and watching all the little birds getting up, so I'm enjoying it. But today I've been busy working with some of these little stones. I do this for my church just as something that we leave at the door and people can take just as a way of encouraging them, because let's face it, life is tough at the moment and not everybody feels hopeful about their future. So sometimes a verse of scripture or one of these little stones just encourages them in some way. So it's just something I do. I pick up stones where I go, I find them, and then I paint them just with white acrylic paint. I normally just buy a little tub from the paint store, just like one of those little sample pots. You don't need a lot, but you will need to give them 2 coats at least of each on each stone. So I've got that far. I've already done some of them, but I thought I'd show you what I do to create them. You could, of course, paint them all over and have a picture. Let me just grab one. So if you wanted to do a picture, this was a little rabbit that we did some years ago, and you could quite easily do that. This one we painted black first and then did the designs on, but I'm not doing that today because that's a little bit more complicated. These ones I'm simply just going to use some acrylic paint markers, and I got quite a nice large set of these for about, I think it was about £10 off Amazon, so I'm very happy with them. They do have a little plastic tip with a nib that actually keeps the nib nice and tight, but you will need from time to time just to press it down so that the paint gets released into the fibers of the felt just on the other side of the plastic. So I don't normally draw on my stones first, but if you do, I would suggest that you use either quite a hard lead pencil like a 2B so it doesn't smudge a lot, or I've just used here a little grey pencil crayon, and I've done a little outline here of just some mountain peaks. So to begin with, what I'm going to do is just simply take my black paint marker, and oopsie, I'm going to put this down to give me a bit more steady handed. Hey, I'm going to just outline these mountains, and I do generally go over the mountain area or the black area depending on what I'm making, once or twice, just to give it a slightly deeper and a slightly thicker line. You can use Sharpies, but I do find with the Sharpie, because they've only got a felt tip nozzle and they don't have the plastic which is nice and firm, that they lose their shape quite quickly, and then if you wanted to do fine lines it becomes a little bit more difficult, but it's not a problem. Okay, so these mountains are going to have a little bit of snow on the peaks, so I'm just going to draw those outlines in quickly. And you can see that these paints are going on fairly easily, and the other thing that I really do love about them is that they actually dry quite quickly. So the next thing I'm going to do is, I'm not going to colour the snow in white because obviously the mountain is white, but I'm going to use the silver one. You can give them a shake as well if you find that the paint is not coming through, because they have a little metal ball inside which will actually allow you to get the paint mixed up nicely. And because I'm on a hard surface, I can press down nicely on this, get the paint coming through. Some of them definitely apply more easily than others. And make sure that while the paint is still wet, oopsie, got too much there, you don't want to actually get your hands in the way, you don't want to smudge it. So I'm just using the dry nib without pressing down, just to pick up some of the paint to spread it onto the other area, because it's too much over there. And it's good sometimes that you see these mistakes so that you can learn from them. I am going over the black lines that I did already before and smudging them a little bit, but that's okay. Once this is dry, I can just go over them again. Very, very forgiving. I did a workshop when we had a church camp with some kids, and they were painting stones, and it was a really lovely way for them to be able to do it, and a lot less messy than having pots of paints and things out, which do tend to turn to mud with little people who haven't learned about colour mixing. Bless them, they're so sweet when they get so excited about doing things. Right, so I'm just going to allow that to dry a little bit. If you wanted to, you can always go over a second coat with your silver, and sometimes you find that there's maybe a spot or two that you've missed, and you can just do that. So right, there we go, that's what I'm going to do there. And then the verse is that I'm going to do here is, faith can move the mountains. So for this I'm going to just freehand it. Okay, so let's do faith can move I wanted that in there. No, we're just going to do mountains. I know some of you are probably very precise in spacing and things like that, but I just find it generally doesn't matter. None of the stones are very regular. Everyone is different. And so you're going to have to, as you work, just come to grips with the imperfections, because the stones being rough are sometimes a little tricky to work on, simply because as you're writing you might hit a little bump, so it's very difficult to get it perfect. So one sends it with love and a prayer as one's doing it, knowing that it's not going to be perfect. Right, so I'm just going over this a second time just to make it slightly bolder, give it a little bit more to stand out, by which time the silver paint is probably dried, and that one I'm happy with. So I'm just going to go over this line here again to make these a little bit sharper. There we go. Yeah, Faith can move mountains. Right, so that was pretty easy to do. I've done the outline here of a little bird, and I thought let's tackle this little bird. He's got a rather nice little beak because he's going to be singing, and it's just a very, very simple shape that I'm doing here. Very, very simple. If you are looking for designs, you can always go on Google Images for other designs that people have already painted on stones, or you could simply just look for outlines, black and white outlines in your search, and you will find that if you go on there you can often find just a line drawing, which is all that you actually need to